I've been talking to a couple of my friends. Both of them are a little bit more but more in like a hobbyist sense. And of course, the whole Epstein thing has really spun a lot of us for a loop. And it's hard to know how to make heads or tails of all of this. And I'm kind of looking at it in terms of, is this just the way that society is now being run? And what I mean is, like, we have slowly eroded a kind of moral center, meaning like we would all have a shared ideas of morality, like a common ground. And we've all kind of balkanized off, and, I follow this and I follow that and I follow this. And so there's no kind of common moral center. And when we've done that, we don't have a moral order that's running over us, right? Like, the moral order is submitted to us. It's a preference thing. We don't have a common moral governance. And we still have a political governance. So we have a political governance over us and a moral order under us. Well, that's kind of it's an inverted way of having things, because politics deals with power. And the people who are in power should have moral scruples. They should be governed by some sort of moral order. And this is what I think you get like a noble class, is a class of people who can manage power. They can govern with power, but do so in a virtuous way, in a moral way, for lack of a better word, in a way that helps the people. So, like, a very kind of quick, I think, example of this is within the samurai class. When you have the warriors at the top, the samurais and the nobility, those people fight on the battlefield. So it's like a chessboard, right? The king's on the battlefield. He's expected to be, in play, which means he, one, has to have the virtue of courage. Two, he has to care about everybody else who's on the battlefield, because everybody else on the battlefield, if they're not getting proper medicine, if they're not being fed right, that makes him more vulnerable. So he's incentivized to care for them. So his power isn't just like, oh, fight these wars. Like, he is got a kind of a moral guidance, a set of incentives that keep him as a moral operator with that power that's given to him. When you look at our societies now, we give a lot of power to people who have no moral accountability to anything. So corporations, for example, they're almost the opposite. They almost like funnel like psychopaths to the top. They're kind of these kind of fascistic regimes where everything in your life is controlled by them, and they're disposable according to the whims of the upper echelon. So on one side, you're supposed to give all of your life to this corporation and give your free time and your weekends, and watch how you speak when you're not at work, and kind of make these relationships that are supposed to help you. And at the other side of it, like, the ruling people over you aren't doing any of that for you, right? Like, they will just cast you away as soon as there is kind of a psychopathy that's already built into that. You have to be able to treat human beings as just cogs in a machine. And the people who can do that, manage that well, and keep the stock prices going up, they're the ones who move higher into that corporate world. So again, we've created like a crucible for like helping those people who have those kind of psychopathic tendencies really excel and make it to the top. And our politics aren't too far behind that. Our politics are not really based on what's best for the people. You don't get ahead because of your contributions to charitable organizations, and because you've been out helping orphans. You get there because it's like a popularity contest for the most part. Make a lot of promises, you say a lot of the right slogans, you tap into like the psychology of your demographic, and you speak to it. So you speak to their wishes and to their fears and to their dreams and aspirations, those kind of things, right? So none of that has anything to do with your personal moral character. It's just you're able to entrance people with ideas and your words, and that's kind of what makes you a good politician. So we've been more and more building a society where the people who are at the top of it have no moral order watching over them. And again, they become a governing order, so they govern our lives, but have no moral order governing, or no necessary moral order governing theirs. And so when you have that, then what else are you going to get but people like Epstein, right? Like and then this is the thing I think that might be hard for Americans especially to understand is like this is kind of how a lot of society ran before. Like America is kind of an exception. I mean, Europe and America are kind of exceptions. You start with someone like Genghis Khan, right? Like it's the psychopaths who ran societies, who ran nations and groups. It was those who were the most ruthless and the most brutal, and it was an achievement to get like noble people. Like that was a, I mean, the Japanese did it as well, but that was an achievement in the West that we figured out a way to kind of keep noble people, or at least some of them, in power, and build a political structure that emphasized trying to keep like noble people at the top, or people who were obedient or submissive to some sort of moral standards that they ruled as a temporal power in the embodiment of some sort of like moral ideal. So like a king is supposed to be kind of a moral archetype, and same with like a prince, right? I mean, that's why we get these romantic tales, right? Because princes and princesses, like they're the best of us, right? They're supposed to be the best of us, and they have power on top of that. They have wealth and power on top of that. That's why you have to qualify and say like an evil king or an evil prince, right? Because by default they're supposed to be a good prince. And again, we've worked so hard in the last, I would say, 40 years, especially, to just deconstruct our moral system and get away from any kind of common morality. And so everyone kind of lives their own truth, right? But we also don't have then an agreed set of rules anymore. And that means that people who shouldn't have power are attaining power. We have no way of, like, as a democratic group, of saying, no, we don't want that person, because we've been balkanized. So maybe part of that, of the population, recognizes that that person would be very destructive for us and would not be helpful for us, but the others don't. And so it's the, Barnabas and Jesus democracy, right? That we end up putting the worst parts of society, democracy ends up voting for the worst parts of society. And that's where I think, again, we get kind of back to this, where we are with Epstein. Like, yeah, we're kind of reverting back to paganism. Like, we're having power govern us, but it's a power that does not have a moral boundary to it. So it's just raw powers, very Machiavellian kind of powers, and some of it's even, dabbling into, it looks like, Satanism. Not, I don't mean that in the religious sense, but I mean in the psychological sense. And this is the other thing I think that we've really lost with the materialism in the West, is that something like psychology is the study of the soul, right? That's kind of as close as we get to spirituality these days, because we can't actually believe in angels and prayer and these invisible things, but we can believe in something like psychopathy and Machiavellianism, because we can find the little neurons and go, okay, see, it's a real thing, it's materialist. But part of what spirituality is about too is cultivating certain behaviors, certain feelings. So just like what I was saying with the corporate world, like that's cultivating certain behavior. There's a spirituality in that. There's a spirituality of narcissism and psychopathy. And Jordan Peterson makes this comparison too with the dating scene, that you have the dating scene where you're expected to have all these one night stands, like one after another. Well, what's that doing? You're in a practice of dehumanizing and using people, right? If you practice using people, you may not be a psychopath to begin with, but you are acting like a psychopath, and you do that long enough, and that becomes part of your personality, and will eventually alter your neural pathways as well. And so this idea of spirituality as this like woo woo stuff, no, spirituality is just like, what are you cultivating in your the kind of emotions, the affections that you show people, motivates you. It would be another, like, are you motivated simply by greed and envy and resentment and domination and control? Well, that's your spirituality. Like, you are practicing a spirituality. What spiritualities are supposed to do is try to help you cultivate good things, like cultivate, sympathy, and cultivate understanding, and cultivate a restraint to personal gain through deception and lies and that kind of thing. And again, that's a discipline, that's a practice, and we don't have that. And you don't just get that. It's just like that's the other. I think there's this huge arrogance. It's like, oh, I'm just going to be. I put my little Black Lives Matter sticker on my car. I'm a good person now. Like, no, you didn't practice anything. Like, you put a dumb sticker. It's like such cheap spirituality. I think the other one that you kind of see a little bit is like the veganism thing. It's like, okay, you're not killing animals. Okay, like that's a start, but don't stop there. Like, you gotta build a spirituality of like, okay, try now helping, I don't know, handicapped people that you see regularly. Just do them a favor. It's cultivating a spirit of compassion or kindness, right? And these are things that you have to practice to build. And they're linked with morality because we have to set like a rational idea of what is good. Well, it's good to be nice to people who have disadvantages. Okay, now the spiritual part is to go practice it. And so what you're again seeing with the Epstein is like these are people who have no spirituality, no morality, and they're just after pure power and I guess like certain senses of domination. And I think that's where this goes. Like, if we keep on this track, we either become that or we continue to empower that and keep giving those forces or those people who have cultivated that kind of spirituality, we keep giving them the governing authority over us rather than, say, like the samurai prince who has cultivated a spirituality of magnanimity and care for his subjects. And so I think we kind of are at a crossroads right now. It's like we can keep continuing to just play this game that we don't need to have a shared morality and that spirituality is all just woo woo. And then we're going to get more and more Epstein people ruling at the upper echelons of power because we have no way of saying they shouldn't or filtering them out. Or we start kind of moving away from that paganism and move back to, all right, what is a rational system of ethics? How can we evaluate spirituality aside from what we can get from psychology? We should definitely use it, but what other sources can we use? And that's the next step in this crossroads to me of our civilizations. Like, we either go towards paganism, and I don't mean that we even worship pagan gods, we just worship power without morality and give people with no morality power, or we start to try to go into nobility and we try to figure out how do we ennoble our own lives, practice a spirituality that makes us better people, and that when we have power, we are able to utilize it with a moral governance that other people can recognize and identify, and that we represent as a shared set of morality.